vita hatutaishinda kwa mazishi, kwa harusi, sijui wapi. Hii vita tuko na wale ambao wamepatiwa kazi na jukumu ya kufanya hiyo kazi, na mimi naamini na nafikiria Wakenya wengi wanaamini ya kwamba wale ambao wamepatiwa hiyo kazi wako na uwezo wa kufanya na kutekeleza hiyo kazi.
Great. President Uhuru Kenyatta there at the devolution conference in the county of Kirinyaga, just basically addressing the issue of corruption in the country. The question you're asking this evening, is Kenya winning or losing the war on corruption? Well, the jury is out there. A report of the multi-agency team on reform of penal and criminal procedure laws to enhance intelligence gathering, investigation, prosecution, asset tracing, freezing, and recovery of proceeds of crime once the law on economic crimes tightened. Top officials of the anti-graft agencies led by Attorney General Paul Kihara are concerned that some of the state officers implicated in corruption remain in office, thus interfering with investigations, with focus now on the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Remember, a couple of weeks, actually weeks ago, the DPP did mention this specifically, and he said he's concerned that individuals who have been named in corrupt dealings end up finding their ways back to the office, and in a way they interfere with the investigations that are touching on them and their offices. And today that team that met the Senate committee raised some of these concerns that they have on the fight against corruption. It's a conversation we're having this evening, and we're having this conversation with Gabriel Mudhuma, who's a governance expert. He's here in studio with me. We'll also be speaking to Nick Piketty, who is a lawyer who's joining us from our City Center studio. But for now, let me take you to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who is having this conversation with lawyer Philip Murgor as well. Sophia.
Good evening, Linda. So it has barely been 2 months since the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions gazetted Philip Murgor as a special public prosecutor, and he's now called it quits. Why is that? He's my guest this evening. Thank you very much, sir, for making time for us. Why did you resign as a special public prosecutor before we even got to see you in action?
Well, Sophia, first of all, if you go back in history, there are many action shots you have of me. I had a very exciting time as a DPP, so that's not one of the things I was necessarily looking forward to. However, I'm glad you've come to my office, and you see I'm a private practitioner. I employ quite a lot of young lawyers, and I have a big office. And for us, there is this thing called the opportunity cost. You want to retain our services or engage us, there must be work, there must be the enabling environment, and then we can, of course, provide any support that we're required. Mm-hmm. 2 months is a very long time for somebody who is in private practice, of doing nothing. Yeah. And I can also say there doesn't appear to have been any prospects for work anytime soon.
So I imagine this is a conversation then that you had with the DPP himself, no less. Talk to us about then what was told to you that was not convincing and you decided to call it quits, because perhaps there were reasons around why this was taking so long.
Well, we did have some discussion about it. We talked about the work coming, and there were promises of work, and then it didn't come. And it just got to that point where we could no longer remain engaged. But I am sympathetic with the DPP and his office. He is only part of the wider government. And whatever it is we wanted or required to enable us do this work may not be something that was at his fingertips to provide to us. So if you notice, I have stated more than once, when he's ready and he has the right facilities in place, we could have another discussion.
Yeah.
So
Many
I haven't turned my back totally.
So you could go back.
If our conditions are met.
So we'll talk about the conditions shortly. But many Kenyans hearing you say there was no work, and looking at the number of cases and files that have been opened by ODPP, and sometimes you will see the same lawyers from ODPP State Council in one case, in the same case, you even wonder how do they ever get around with 30 witnesses. It's so that when you say there's no work, for some they'd find that difficult to understand and believe.
I think you're asking me to define the word, how I mean the word work. Of course, there must be plenty of work. Indeed, I believe there's work that is overwhelming. But I can only refer to work that is assigned to me. If it is not assigned to me, I say no work was assigned to me. So really that's what I'm talking about. But I have no doubt in my mind that there is plenty of work. And if the DPP is to win the war against corruption or succeed in the prosecutions in corruption cases, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Do you know why work was not assigned to you? Because Kenyans would want to understand, is this part of the issues in ODPP that perhaps need to come out to allow for a more streamlined process in as far as prosecutions and those that are in charge?
Sophia, it's possible that they're coping with the work, and it is only when the work becomes overwhelming they'll find time to give us the work. That's why I said I'd rather get on with my private practice, and if and when they feel that they need our support, they can let us know.
Yeah.
So I didn't, I can only talk about what is not given to me. I don't know what is on his table and what is expected to be on his table in a month, 2, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Talk to us then about the conditionalities you have, because you say if they are met, you could go back. As you speak of that, also mention for me if you felt there was a double standard between how you as special prosecutors were treated and the senior, Queen's Counsel, Qureshi.
My issues are only 2. We were idle. I was idle. I had no work, as far as that office is concerned. And I have mentioned that there is the conditionality we have that we cannot take work against the DPP as long as we are public prosecutors. So that presents an opportunity cost that is too high. The other condition, a very simple one, is the issue of security. If you want us to undertake these very serious, high-profile prosecution cases, please assign us some personal security.
Allow me to interject there. I know I've asked to, but on that point, wouldn't that be an issue with his own lawyers, state counsel, who do not have security? Then they see this security with you. Wouldn't that cause demoralization with other staff wondering why the double standard? Do you see that conflict or difficulty in those decisions?
I've been a DPP. I know what I'm talking about. I also believe even the youngest state counsel, when they're handling a delicate and very sensitive case, they should be given security. So it's not like I think I belong to a special category. The work of prosecutions is inherently dangerous. I am very happy to see today that the office of the DPP at NSSF is very well guarded and there's enough security. I'm happy for that. But if you are an evil mind and intended badly against the office of the DPP, would you go and attack that office, which is well guarded now, or would you come and attack Philip Murgor downtown?
But had they promised security and not given, or did this come up after the fact, signing the contract?
They had promised. And, it became a never-ending discussion. Yeah. We'll look into it, we'll look into it, and we'll look into it.
So to the question of a double standard...
And I happen to know that getting a personal bodyguard or security is a phone call away. It's just a question of asking the right person to provide it.
Yeah. So was it a double standard? Is it, in your view, with the Queen Counsel Qureshi and how you are treated as special prosecutors?
As I said, I can only talk about the 3 of us who are appointed public prosecutors. We were appointed and we all do not have security and we all do not have any work. We don't know the terms under which the Queen's Counsel, Mr. Qureshi, was appointed, but somehow he's not complaining, and I happen to see that he had plenty of security whenever he was in town. Yeah. So it is what I see and what I can talk about. The exact terms, the contract, I can only speculate.
Yeah. As we move away from that, we'll wait to see what happens. But weigh in for me, because one of the things that have been dominating news headlines is the conversation on corruption, but perhaps the politicization of it. No less than the Deputy President has come out to say this: one, corruption should not be targeted against or towards communities or projects. When it starts being looked at that way, and when you hear this kind of sentiments, do they worry you? Today, the DPP was before Senate. He said there's no such thing. In fact, it's the people, the political class, that's doing the politicization. It's not a selection of cases from a particular region. It is an indiscriminate approach in as far as the prosecution is concerned. For you, what do you make of all this discourse?
Sophia, I agree with the DPP totally. When you are engaged in questionable activities, you commit a crime, you're corrupt, it is you and you alone that should face the music. When I was DPP, this same kind of thing happened. I was a vigorous DPP. I did prosecute many times myself. People who then said it was a tribe issue. It so happened that time it also happened to be the tribe I belonged to, so you can't use that argument against me. So I do not agree with those who say it is being politicized. I do not agree with those who say it is a tribe that is being targeted. I think how the DPP counters that is simply get on with the prosecution and show the facts to the public that this is what he was basing his prosecution on.
Yeah. So we saw a meeting with the various organs and as far as the criminal justice system meet a while back, because before it was a lot of mudslinging, blame games, and the weakest link was seen to be the judiciary. I wonder who and what institution you see as the weakest link now, where we are, because at the end of the day, Kenyans are sitting back saying, okay, we're waiting, we're watching, will there be fruits born out of these efforts?
You know, it's ironic that you asked me the question. I've been there. I've done that. When I joined as DPP, the same discussion went on. Who was at fault between the investigator, the prosecutor, and finally the judiciary? When I was involved, we hadn't got to the point where we could blame the judiciary. We were still working on improving the quality of investigation, quality of prosecution, to the point where we would be able to say, everything is perfect in the first two stages, and we are now watching the judiciary. That is not to say the judiciary is not to blame. I, as DPP, came across very strange decisions, and one of which is what we see that has just come up in the Supreme Court yesterday, where a judge terminates the Goldenberg prosecutions on a whim. I saw many other cases like that. So there are occasions where the judiciary is to blame, but coming to the point, it's important, like they finally did, for all the agencies to sit together, work together in a harmonious manner to serve the public interest, which is fighting to ensure that, one, there is a fair trial, but at the same time, if in deserving cases a case is proved, their convictions.
Yeah. One of the reasons and the cases made for why experienced prosecutors like yourself needed to be brought into ODPP was because of the kind of, defense lawyers we see from the defendants, senior counsel, and there's always seemed to be sort of like an imbalance. What for you would be critical for ODPP right now to look into in as far as just tightening that office to make sure that they are making gains as opposed to being seen as a lot of people are being charged, some are being let go?
Sophia, I think the intention was there. It's obvious what you're saying. There is a mismatch between the skills on the defense side, especially in grand corruption cases. The corruption suspects have all the money and hire the best lawyers that money can buy. The ODPP staff remain our brothers and sisters, civil servants, not well paid, not secure, demotivated in many ways, and they're expected to put up a fight that is equal to that put up by the defense. That is the challenge of the DPP. He must get facilities that encourage his officers. But in the meantime, the quick win for him was to engage some external counsel to beef up the team. He doesn't have much time, as far as administrations are concerned. It is this administration that is saying that it must end impunity, it must bring down corruption. And so if one were to look at that as a timeline, Bwana Haji has 3 years to prove himself. 3 years is a long time, and it can be a very short time if you start slow. So he has to be quick off the blocks. I also want to say that Mr. Haji is a great guy, and he's a man after my own heart. He should be encouraged. And even as I resigned from the position he had given to me, it's not to say that I don't support what he's trying to do. I've been in that job. It's the hardest job in the Republic, and it is the loneliest. If you do it well, you will have no friends. But if you do it sloppily, badly, and enrich yourself, you will stay a long time. But I don't think that's what the purpose of the job.
All right. We'll wait to see what happens. Before actually I let you go, I must ask this because you've talked about it. You are DPP. You've taken you had taken a job of prosecutor in ODPP. Why is that? And also, I'd imagine, let me perhaps go ahead of you as you respond and clarify. If it's to public service, then why leave so quickly? Why not allow that to be still the driver of the safety? ODPP himself, the DPP, has talked about threats to his life, Al-Shabaab, all these other things, but still pursues.
Sophia, if I was a lone practitioner without an office operating out of a briefcase, I would have given him much more time. I'm an employer. I'm in business. I have bills to pay. 2 months is a hell of a long time to sit around waiting. All I did was to say, when you're ready, let me know. Okay. So that is, and you've also asked me a very good question. I was a DPP, and why do I allow myself to become just a public prosecutor? It isn't the title, it isn't the position, it's putting myself out to help. Whatever fees he was going to pay us would not compare in any way to what the Defense Counsel would earn in similar cases or in the same case. So it wasn't about the amount of money, but we must be compensated for the time we spent.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, Philip Murgo, with us here on The Big Story. And important to note, as he reiterates that point about there is not much time, and for all Kenyans, justice delayed is justice denied. So all eyes are not only on the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, but the entire criminal justice system as that conversation continues in the country. What will happen next is a matter of time, Linda.
Sophia Nuna, thank you so much. Just some interesting revelations there. Philip Murgo basically saying there was no work. I stayed there for a while. There was not as much work as he expected. So let's have a conversation on the fight against corruption in the country. We're doing this with Gabriel Mudhuma, who's the governance expert, and Nick Biketi as well, who's a lawyer. He's joining us from our City Center studio. Mudhuma, let me begin with you. Listening into Philip Murgo saying, quote, there was no work. With everything that's going on in the country, what comes to mind?
Alinda, thank you and good evening. Well, the point of departure that I take from Philip Murgo, and we have to give him the credit that the man has been a DPP before, so he probably knows what he's talking about. But when he's saying there's no work, then I think we need to question, what kind of work did not come his side? Because as you put it correctly, there are so many cases, that the DPP is trying to prosecute. I mean, we have seen, cases that have gone, all the way to court. My guess, given the fact that Philip Murgo is somebody who has a very good legal advantage and a man of no mean repute, if you put it that way, is to question when he's talking about the resources that were not allocated to him, the fact that he was not getting work. Again, we need to ask what kind of work never came to him. And me, the guess that probably I have is somebody like him, given his experience and also as a former DPP, is probably somebody who would have dealt with high-profile cases. Is that what never came to his side? Probably that's the communication he's trying to communicate to us, given the fact that, yes, he says he has resigned, but also another, point of departure, Linda, we should also get quite clearly is that he has really not turned his back away totally from the office of the DPP. He says when that work is available, when the resources that he's talking about are put in place, then he's more than willing to come back. back. So many people may read as if it's a slap across the face of the DPP, but from where I'm seated, I don't think that's what it is at all. So we have to give it time, see what the kind of resources that he's saying were never made available to him. The work that he's talking about was never made available to him. I feel, given the fact that, you know, the corruption, the way we are seeing corruption grow on a daily basis, and the fact that Kenyans are saying we are not seeing serious people, or the big fish as they call it, who are not brought to these offices.
No, but
so we expect if they are going to come, you know, then I think the office of the DPP and what Wakili Philip Mugor is talking about may actually be realized sooner than later.
Mudhuma, the fact that you're not seeing high-profile cases, probably he's actually answered you in a way, because he says you have the defense team that usually hires the best of the best lawyers.
Right.
And then you have guys from the office of the DPP, and he says who are, in most instances, not paid as well as they should be. They're not as motivated as they should be. And probably that is why they are where they are. You see very little prosecutions.
And again, Linda, on a parting, you know, he's also said something quite, quite interesting. He says, you know, the thing is not just about sitting in the office without work. He's also running a law firm. And he's given, you know, the fact like 2 months is long, you know, he's paying people. He has, you know, and that can be understood. That can be understood. And we probably, from where I'm seated, I totally understand it very well. But still, when you talk about the high-profile cases, we saw like this one of Justice Mwilu, where the DPP went out and got, you know, the Queen's Counsel Qureshi. Could that have caused some, you know, for lack of a better, but could that have brought some small skirmishes? Maybe, we do not know. We are just speculating. But could that have been probably the likes of Philip Mugor would have said, you know, that would have been a high-profile case, probably the which he would have taken he himself and maybe done a good job of it. Let's remember, he's a former DPP, so he knows 1 or 2 things about, you know, how these things operate. But when he talks about, you know, other people, well, the way he's put it quite eloquently, that, you know, the people who are corrupt really have all, you know, these stashes of money where they are able to hire the best lawyers. And here you have the DPP who's probably working with, you know, when you look at it, the monetary value is not that pleasing as we may put it. That just tells you it's more of, you know, you're doing your work out of loyalty to the nation, because really you know very well that, you know, the DPP, the office of the DPP may not have the resources similar to what these other people are paying. So more of it goes to the loyalty. And actually, he said it very well, it's not about the money. So if it's not about the money, then that office of the DPP and the DCI, let me bring him in at this point, must use that one currency. What is that currency that I'm talking about? That has to be facts and truth, Linda. And I think if we go by that then, and given the fact that Philip Mugor has said it's not about the money, then it has to be one thing and one thing only, loyalty to the nation.
Biketi, can you hear me?
No.
All right, so what are your thoughts about everything Mugor has said and the fight against corruption?
One, I would appreciate the challenges that my senior Mugor has talked about. And as a practitioner in these courts, I can actually pay witness to what is talked about. From what we are seeing from the courts, I think that there is some ill preparedness that is coming from the side of the prosecution. And I think, as Mugor was putting it, they need to be beefed up. But there is that question of financing, or rather of paying up these special prosecutors that is coming up. However, that should be interposed with the fact that we've seen in recent times the state going ahead to bring in prosecutors from outside the jurisdiction. So then the question that begs is that, is it a question of resources, or is it a question of lack of confidence in terms of the expertise that can be sourced locally? So that is what I see from the question, or rather from the issues that my senior is raising in view of the fact of resources and the capacity that office of the DPP has. However, there is also one critical factor that my senior counsel, Philip Mugor, has raised, that Haji has a limited time span with which he has to prove to the public that he's been worth that office. That is, I think, is a term of about 3 years. From what we are witnessing from the cases that he's been prosecuting so far, we've seen little takeoff, and there seem to be some challenges or other hiccups from the office of the DPP and coordination with DCI in terms of preparing. Because, Linda, you must appreciate that the investigation, or rather putting together the evidence, is not done by the office of the DPP. That is done by the DCI. So they need to be more smoothness in terms of coordinating their act. Or maybe could we say there is some sort of hurry in bringing these cases to court before they are fully prepared to come and prosecute? Because you remember there was a discussion that actually, I think it was a discourse between the president and Chief Justice Maraga, where the question was that the judiciary is actually delaying the matters, or maybe the defense is delaying the matters by adjourning. That was the position that the Chief Justice was trying to say, that I will not condone lawyers coming to court and adjourning matters on frivolous grounds. But actually the truth is, if you come to court, you realize that most of the adjournments or the delays are actually being occasioned from the side of the prosecution. And most of them are from what I can call preliminary matters, that we are not prepared on this. We've not served the defense with 1, 2, 3 documents, which are mandatory. So then, from where I sit, on one point of principle that I agree with Wakili Murgor, is that they need to be some sort of capacity beef up, not only with the DPP, but also with DCI.
Right, that's a good place to just take a short break. Hold on, Wakili, I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. We were watching The Big Story. Thank you for staying with us. Let me take a short